Who is failing? I'm Mr. Beat. Well, I've failed many times in my life. Like when I didn't put on enough sunscreen when I visited Miami recently. However, I didn't fail to go to the Brigade 2506 Museum and Library while in Miami, the official place to honor the memory of the group of Cuban exiles who attempted to overthrow the dictator Fidel Castro 63 years ago. But yeah, that attempt was a failure. For the few Americans who are actually familiar with the Bay of Pigs invasion, probably all they know is that it was a failure. But in this video, I'm going to explain to you why it was a failure, huh? Yeah, and you better just like, listen, because if you don't, I will fail you. This is Cuba. Well, this is Cuba today. This is Cuba on a map. Oh, look at that. Not that far from the United States. Just 90 miles, or 145 kilometers, apart at the shortest distance between the two. This is Cuba in the 1950s. It was during this decade that Cuba went through a big revolution, ultimately leading to this dude, the dictator Fulgencio Batista, getting kicked out of power. Even though he was a dictator, the United States government had supported Batista and was not happy he was kicked out of power. Yeah, the United States government has sadly supported many dictators over the years, but Cuba's next dictator they did not support. So hey, that's progress. This dude, Fidel Castro, ultimately became the new dictator, and after initially trying to work with him, the US government changed their minds when it was clear he was restricting civil liberties, abandoning democracy, and, most importantly, implementing a command economy in the country. In fact, Castro's attacks on both political freedoms and economic freedoms led to around 200,000 Cubans fleeing the country for the United States, specifically nearby South Florida. If you want to learn more about the Cuban Revolution, by the way, the Casual Historian has just released a couple videos over on his channels all about it if you want to check it out. Oh, and those videos feature Dwight Eisenhower quotes read by a mysterious voice. One of those who fled Cuba was Dr. Eduardo Zayas Bazan.
At least on the Batista, you had a market economy, and there was opposition newspaper, opposition TV stations, opposition radio stations. Under Castro, by the middle of 1960, everything had been confiscated by the government. There was no newspapers that were not pro-Castro. He had taken over all of the television channels and all of the other means of communication. So that was part of the reason why I joined the underground. And in September of 1960, I left Cuba because I knew that there was the makings of an invasion.
By the time Zayas Bazan had arrived in Florida, the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, was already researching ways to assassinate Castro. And they tried to assassinate him. Oh boy, did they try, and often in creative ways. They spiked cigars with poison and sent them to him, hoping he'd smoke them. They planned on packing a seashell full of explosives, hoping he'd pick it up when he went diving. They tried to contaminate one of Castro's diving suits with a flesh-eating fungus. They sent him a pen that was supposed to prick him with poison from a tiny enclosed needle when he wrote with it. The CIA ultimately tried to kill Fidel Castro more than 60 times over a period of 40 years. Yeah, none of the attempts worked. Even though President John F. Kennedy officially approved a secret campaign of terrorist attacks and covert operations meant at overthrowing the Cuban government, known as Operation Mongoose, the CIA had already secretly been at it for a couple years by that point. The previous president, Dwight Eisenhower, had approved plans by the CIA to push a bunch of anti-Castro propaganda in Cuba and provide aid to Cubans who wanted Castro gone. Shortly before he left office, Eisenhower also gave the green light to the CIA to aid an invasion of Cuba to overthrow Castro, as long as it was led by Cuban exiles like Eduardo Zayas Bazan. What were you risking by deciding to be a part of this invasion? You still had a lot of family and friends that you would be risking not seeing anymore, right?
I got married December the 12th, 1959, with my long-term sweetheart, and our first son, Eddie, was born November the 1st, 1960 in the United States. I really joined the training camp of the invasion early in January of 1961, and I knew that's exactly what I was going to do.
But Eisenhower left office before any plan could go down, man. No worries. The new president, John F. Kennedy, was on board. On April 4th, 1961, he approved Operation Zapata, an amphibious landing on the beaches at the Bay of Pigs, located on Cuba's southern coast, around 93 miles or 150 kilometers from Cuba's capital city of Havana. Paratroopers would arrive in advance to distract Cuban forces. B-26 planes would bomb Cuban airports and air bases. Approximately 1,500 soldiers would then launch a surprise attack under the cover of darkness. The hope was that other anti-Castro Cubans in the area would then join them so that they could occupy the area long enough for a rival government by exiled leaders to kick Castro out and take over. Easy peasy, right? Not so much.
We interrupt this regularly scheduled programming so Mr. Beat can pay the bills.
This video is sponsored in part by Delete Me. Did you know that your personal data is sold online by data brokers? Anyone can buy your personal details. Yes, even your enemies, who could get your personal information to dox you or stalk you or harass you. Well, I personally recommend Delete Me to make sure your personal information stays private. What I like about Delete Me is that it sends you these personalized privacy reports showing what they found, where they found it, and what they deleted. I've been using it, and they've already scrubbed my personal information from all kinds of sites. Get 20% off of Delete Me consumer plans by going to joindeleteme.com/MrBeat. There's a QR code. Use promo code MrBeat. Once again, that's joindeleteme.com/MrBeat, code MrBeat. Thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring this video.
And now back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Let's see, where were we? Ah yes, the Bay of Pigs, one of the worst possible sites of an invasion of Cuba to overthrow Fidel Castro's government. Lovely.
I was in a group of 5 frogmen that landed in Playa Girón with Greystone Lynch, who was a former Marine captain and who trained us during the last month and a half of our training. We trained for about 3 months. We were all good swimmers. So what we trained in was in different type of arms and demolition. The frogmen would have gone to other parts of Cuba and tried to sabotage some of the ships that Castro still might have running.
The approximately 1,500 Cuban exiles the CIA chose had trained for months on the Pacific coast of Guatemala, naming themselves Brigade 2506 to honor their comrade Carlos Rodriguez Santana, a brigade member killed in a training accident. 2506 was Santana's serial number. On the night of April 14th, 1961, the invasion fleet left Puerto Cabezas, Nicaragua, and sailed for the Bay of Pigs in the cover of darkness. Remember, nobody was supposed to know that the United States was orchestrating this whole thing. In fact, they made it seem like Cubans within Cuba were leading a big resistance. So this means that before they even invaded the Bay of Pigs, there had to be diversions. In the early morning of April 15th, 1961, 8 B-26 planes simultaneously dropped bombs on 3 Cuban airfields. 2 got damaged, with 1 losing its crew on board. And there was the Deception B-26. Deception. About an hour and a half after the other 8 B-26 planes bombed their targets, another B-26 that was made to look like it was attacked by ground fire flew into Miami International Airport to make it seem like the pilot who flew it was anti-Castro. The world media fell for it, but the Cuban government wasn't falling for it. The Cuban foreign minister, Raul Roa Garcia, accused the United States of conducting the air attacks, in which the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Adlai Stevenson, responded, "Nuh-uh." His boss, President Kennedy, backed him up, saying, quote, "This was a struggle of Cuban patriots against a Cuban dictator. While we could not be expected to hide our sympathies, we made it repeatedly clear that the armed forces of this country would not intervene in any way." More diversions followed, but ain't nobody fell for those, and these diversions, you could say, backfired as the Cuban government beefed up its security on the island. Regardless, in the early morning hours of April 17th, 1961, around 1,500 Cuban exiles trained by the CIA waited ashore at the Bay of Pigs.
See, the idea was not for us to win right away. We were supposed to secure a few square miles of territory, which we did at the beginning. And once we had secured that territory for 3 days, we would have landed our civilian government, and then we would have asked for recognition from friendly government, including the United States government, as the legitimate government of Cuba.
The attack was doomed from the start. First of all, the unloading of the soldiers got delayed after boats got damaged by sharp coral reefs. When the soldiers did make it to land, the swampy terrain made it difficult to unload supplies and move about. To make matters worse, one of the signal lights carried by a Cuban exile accidentally turned on, causing Cuban soldiers to shine their Jeep's headlights at it and then leading to an exchange of gunfire. A radio station nearby broadcast the details. Yeah, the CIA was supposed to make sure there were no radio stations nearby. Oops. Heck, the Cuban armed forces already were on high alert anyway. Castro himself awoke to be informed about the landings shortly after they happened, and this led him to mobilize the Cuban military, which soon sank 2 supply ships that had ammunition, food, and medicine on board for the exiles. Still, more and more Cuban exiles arrived on shore, aided by tanks and 177 paratroopers who parachuted in. The exiles had a limited amount of success moving further inland, but by 9 a.m., Cuban troops from outside the area had begun arriving. At around 11 a.m., Castro made a statement that was broadcast across the entire country that said Cuba had been invaded by traitors to the revolution. Around that time, Cuban forces shot down a B-26, and all remaining Cuban exile ships had begun to retreat. For the rest of the day and through the next day, the Cuban exiles on land and in the air faced repeated counterattacks from Cuban forces and received no support. The exiles had lost 2 of their ships and half of their air fleet. They were losing. And Kennedy was like, uh-oh, I think we done messed up here. And yet, Kennedy refused to send in Marines to help them out since he didn't want to make it seem like the United States was really the one in charge. However, he did send 6 Navy jets to provide air cover for the exiles, but for just 1 hour, and not until the morning of April 19th. Due to presumably forgetting the time zone difference, the bombers got there too early, and Cubans shot 2 of them down, resulting in 4 Americans being killed. By this time, it was all but over anyway. The exiles had surrendered and were then loaded up onto trucks that were so crowded and sealed up completely that 9 died from suffocation. For those lucky enough to have windows so they could breathe, they heard Cubans threatening to kill them as they drove past.
I was wounded on the 3rd day. It was in my right knee. I could not walk. I was one of the first prisoners taken. We were taken to the main military compound in Havana. I am convinced that Fidel Castro planned to execute us. The international media had already arrived, and someone told Fidel Castro, there are too many, we can't do that. Why don't we just interview them in front of the television?
The exiles were locked up in overcrowded cells and slept on nasty floors. There was one toilet for every 150 prisoners. Of the approximately 1,297 exiles who landed at the Bay of Pigs, at least 1,183 were captured and imprisoned. More than 100 exiles died during the invasion, as well as 176 Cubans killed in action. And yeah, everybody knew that the United States was the country really behind the invasion. Castro put all of the invaders on trial for treason. While some were executed, Castro kept most of the invaders alive because he thought he could get stuff in return from the American government. At first, he requested, he apparently requested tractors. Well, that's interesting. But then he later upped his request to
$1 million.
No, but seriously, $28 million. Ultimately, the United States got the prisoners back by agreeing to give Cuba $53 million in food and medicine raised through private donations. In December 1962, after being imprisoned for around 20 months, the prisoners were freed, returning to the United States, most flown into Miami. On December 29th, President Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy met with Bay of Pig invasion veterans, along with more than 40,000 other Cuban exiles, at the Orange Bowl for a ceremony to honor them. Kennedy presented the flag of the brigade, saying he hoped it one day would be returned to a, quote, free Havana. Well, today Cuba still has a dictatorship, sadly. The Bay of Pigs invasion, as most folks call it now, was an embarrassing defeat for Kennedy and the United States. It showed the CIA was in over their heads, they got too cocky and miscalculated. And the agency must have been embarrassed too, as it classified lots of information that made it look bad. In 1998, we got declassified conclusions for the first time. The CIA, number one, exceeded its capabilities in developing the project from guerrilla support to overt armed action without any plausible deniability. Number two, failed to assess risks and to adequately communicate information and decisions internally and with other government principles. Number three, insufficiently involved leaders of the exiles. Number four, failed to sufficiently organize internal resistance in Cuba. Number five, failed to competently collect and analyze intelligence about Cuban forces. Number six, had poor internal management of communications and staff. Number seven, had insufficient employment of high-quality staff. Number eight, had insufficient Spanish speakers, training facilities, and material resources. And number nine, had few stable policies and/or contingency plans. The invasion also ended up being quite a political victory for Castro and his authoritarian government. It turned not only most Cubans, but most Latin Americans against the American government, and only made Castro more popular. Still, despite feeling abandoned by the American government, many of the Cuban exiles who participated in the Bay of Pigs invasion remained steadfastly loyal to the United States in the following years. Some went on to become officers in the military. Some even served in the Vietnam War. Today, here in the United States, we honor and remember the members of Brigade 2506 as heroes who risked everything to overthrow a dictator and free their home country. And what an honor it was to visit the Brigade 2506 Museum and Library in Miami. And good news, it's getting a brand new building soon. Exciting stuff.
In February of 1964, I went to Kansas State Teachers College.
Emporia?
In Emporia, Kansas, yes.
I went to school there too.
Did you?
Yeah.
Let me tell you, I love Kansas. I would take courses in Omaha at Creighton University.
I used to live in Omaha too.
Did you?
Yeah, I'm not even joking. Yeah. And it was an even greater honor to have the privilege to speak to an actual veteran of the Bay of Pigs invasion. Dr. Eduardo Zayas Bazan, thank you for sharing your story with us. Dr. Zayas Bazan is proof that perhaps the Bay of Pigs invasion wasn't as big of a failure as we make it out to be. Let me explain. Sure, the actual invasion by the United States government, no doubt, was a failure, but the United States also gained a bunch of freedom-loving Cuban Americans in the years since. Just walking around Miami, it's pretty clear Cuban Americans have been a tremendous asset to the United States. Cuba? Oh, you've been missing out. Thanks to all the lovely folks at the Brigade 2506 Museum and Library for helping me make this video. I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. If you ever are in Miami, you should convince whoever's with you to go there with you. Cuban Americans watching, I'd love to hear from you. ¿Dónde estás? Por favor, comente abajo. Gracias por permanecer curioso. Adiós.